The afternoon sun poured through the dusty classroom windows of East Tupelo Consolidated School, casting long golden beams across the worn wooden desks. It was the kind of southern day where even the air felt slow, heavy, and still, except for the quiet hum coming from the last row. There, half hidden behind a stack of textbooks, sat a young Elvis Presley, 12 years old, clutching a pencil that had long since stopped writing. His foot tapped gently under the desk, keeping time with the soft melody he was humming under his breath. Music was his refuge, his hiding place from the world. He didn't hum to show off. He hummed because it made him feel safe, like wrapping a warm blanket around the lonely corners of his heart. But today, his humming did not go unnoticed. "All right, class," Miss Porter announced as she wiped chalk dust from her skirt. "Since we're learning about presentation skills, we're going to have a little demonstration." The children groaned. Presentations meant standing in front of everyone, and nobody liked that. Elvis especially didn't. He sank lower in his seat. Miss Porter's eyes scanned the room and landed on him. "Elvis Presley," she said with a tight smile. "Since you seem to enjoy making noise during quiet time, why don't you come up and sing something for the class?" His heart dropped. A cold shiver raced up his spine. "Ma'am," he whispered, "you heard me." Her tone was sharp enough to cut. "Let's see if your humming is as impressive as you think it is." He didn't think it was impressive, not at all. He never hummed for anyone else. He hummed because it felt like breathing, but refusing wasn't an option. Miss Porter tapped her foot impatiently as the rest of the class turned in their seats, eyes wide with curiosity or mischief. Elvis rose slowly, every movement heavy with dread. His legs trembled as he walked to the front of the class. The floorboards creaked under each step, sounding like giant cracks in his confidence. He could hear snickers behind him already. He faced the room, hands shaking at his sides. 30 pairs of eyes stared back. His throat tightened so badly he thought no sound would ever come out. "Well," Miss Porter folded her arms, "we're waiting." Elvis took a deep breath. He thought of his mama, how she always told him to sing whenever he felt scared. "It's your gift, baby," she would whisper, "let it out." So he tried. He opened his mouth and let out a soft, trembling note, a little melody he thought was pretty, something simple, something safe. But it barely floated past the first row. The room erupted, not into applause, but laughter. Kids nudged one another, covering their mouths as if trying to hide how funny they thought he sounded. One boy whispered loudly, "He sounds like a kitten stuck in a shoebox." Miss Porter didn't laugh, but the look on her face said enough. Disappointment, annoyance, a quiet, dismissive judgment. She sighed loudly. "Elvis," she said, shaking her head, "you'll never be a singer, not with a voice like that." The words hit him harder than any slap. He stood frozen, his cheeks burning red, his eyes stinging. For a moment the classroom blurred. He felt small, smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He finally forced his legs to move, returning to his seat while the giggles and whispers continued like tiny daggers stabbing at his back. He kept his head down and didn't touch his pencil again. Inside him something cracked, but something else stayed alive, a small flame, the kind that flickered weakly in the wind but refused to go out. As Miss Porter continued the lesson, Elvis kept his gaze on the wooden surface of his desk. He didn't hear the chalk. He didn't hear the whispers. He didn't hear anything except the echo of her harsh words. "You'll never be a singer." Yet deep inside, underneath the hurt, underneath the humiliation, a quiet voice whispered something different. Sing anyway. He didn't know it yet, but that tiny voice, the one no teacher could silence, would one day shake the entire world. The gravel crunching beneath Elvis's shoes was the only sound as he walked home from school that afternoon. The sun was dipping low over Tupelo, painting the sky in soft orange and fading gold, but even the beauty of the evening couldn't lift the heaviness sitting in his chest. His school bag felt heavier than usual, as if the words spoken earlier had slipped inside it, weighing him down with every step. When he reached the small, weathered Presley home, he paused at the bottom of the porch steps. Normally he'd run up them 2 at a time, eager to smell his mama's cooking or hear her warm "Hey there, baby." But today he climbed slowly, each foot dragging like he was wading through deep water. He sat down on the top step, dropped his bag beside him, and wrapped his arms around his knees. The wooden railings were cracked and the paint was peeling, but this porch was where he felt safest. More than any classroom or playground, it was where he hummed his favorite tunes, where he imagined singing on a big stage someday. But now even that dream felt ridiculous. He pressed his forehead against his knees, willing himself not to cry. Boys weren't supposed to cry. His teacher made that clear too, with the way she stared at him like he wasn't worth the time it took to listen. The screen door creaked open behind him. Elvis, came a voice soft as cotton. He didn't look up. His mother, Gladys Presley, stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one glance at him. His slumped shoulders, the clenched jaw, the trembling breaths, and her heart squeezed. She didn't need to ask. A mother always knows when her child is holding something fragile inside. She sat down beside him without a word, her weight dipping the wooden step slightly. For a moment, she just rested her hand gently on his back, letting him feel her presence. Elvis sniffed but kept his face hidden. "School rough today?" she asked finally, her voice warm and steady like a lullaby he had heard all his life. He nodded once, his throat tightened again. "Wanna tell me what happened?" A long silence stretched between them. The cicadas buzzed in the nearby trees, filling the air with their late summer song. Elvis wiped his nose with the back of his hand and sat up. His eyes were red, though he avoided looking at her. "Miss Porter made me sing in front of the whole class," he muttered, his voice cracking. Gladys's eyebrows lifted with concern. "She made you?" Elvis nodded. Shame washed over him again. "I didn't wanna. I wasn't ready." His mama kept her hand on his back, rubbing small, comforting circles. "And then?" she asked gently. Elvis swallowed hard. "Everybody laughed at me." The words came out small, like a wounded whisper. Gladys's face softened. She pulled him sideways into her arms, and he didn't resist. He buried his face in her shoulder, inhaling the familiar smell of flour, soap, and something warm and sweet that was just her and Miss Porter. Gladys asked after a moment, her voice careful. Elvis stiffened a little. "She said I'll never be a singer, not ever, said I don't have a voice." He felt his mother go still, not in anger but in heartbreak. She lifted his chin gently, guiding his eyes to hers. Tears pricked his lashes, but hers were steady, full of something fierce. "Elvis Aaron Presley," she said slowly, clearly, "you listen to me. God gave you a voice, a beautiful one. You sing from your heart, baby. Not everybody can hear that yet, but I do." He blinked, confused. "But Mama, what if she's right? What if I'm just silly?" Gladys shook her head, brushing a tear from his cheek with her thumb. "Honey, sometimes people can only see what's on the surface. They don't look deep enough. They don't see what's growing inside." Elvis leaned into her touch, the painful tension in his chest loosening just a little. "You have a gift," she continued, "and you don't hide gifts just because someone else doesn't recognize them. Do you hear me?" He nodded weakly. She took his hands in hers, small, calloused hands that knew hard work, holding onto hands that would one day hold a microphone before millions. "Baby, you sing when you're scared. You sing when you're brave. You sing because that's who you are. Don't let anybody, not a teacher, not a classmate, not even the world, tell you who you can't be." A tear finally escaped down Elvis's cheek. She brushed it away and placed a soft kiss on his forehead. "Now," she whispered, "sing for me." Elvis hesitated. His voice felt broken, weak, but when he looked into his mama's eyes, he saw something stronger than doubt. He saw belief. Steady, unwavering belief. So he opened his mouth, and the melody that came out was trembly, soft, but full of heart. Gladys smiled through tears. "That's my boy." And in that moment, on that tiny porch in Tupelo, a wounded dream began to heal. Not because the world believed in him, but because one person did. The Memphis sun was already sinking when Elvis pushed open the door to Sun Records, a narrow building tucked between a barber shop and a hardware store. Its bright neon sign buzzed faintly in the warm evening air. He hesitated at the entrance, fingers tapping nervously against the paper bag he carried. Inside that bag was a simple idea, a simple dream. He wanted to record a song as a gift for his mama. It wasn't for radio, not for fame, not for an audience, for her. Just her. He stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling sharply. The studio smelled of old wood, cigarette smoke, and the faint aroma of coffee that had been reheated too many times. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt important somehow, sacred, the kind of place where something big could happen, even if you didn't know it yet. Behind the small front desk sat Marian Kaska, her blonde hair pinned neatly, glasses perched on her nose as she typed on a heavy machine that clacked with determination. She didn't look up at first. Most people who walked in were kids with half-baked dreams or men trying to sound like somebody else. Then Elvis spoke. "Ma'am, I'd like to make a record, if that's okay." His voice was polite, too polite, and trembling just a bit. That tremble made her pause. She lifted her eyes and took in the lanky boy standing before her. Dark hair, shy eyes, hands that didn't seem to know where to rest. He wasn't dressed like a singer. No fancy suit, no stylized confidence. Just a hard-working Memphis boy in worn clothes. "What kind of music do you sing?" she asked, curiosity flickering in her voice. Elvis looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "Well, all kinds, I guess, but mostly I just sing from my heart." Something about the way he said it made Marian put down her pen. "All right, honey," she said gently, "come on in." She guided him to the small recording booth, a cramped space with a single mic, a stool, and walls covered in scratched-up acoustic padding. Elvis wiped his sweaty palms on his pants and stepped inside. When Marian closed the door, everything went silent. His own heartbeat felt louder than the room. "You ready?" Her voice crackled through the small speaker. He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Marian hit the button. Elvis took a deep breath. He thought of his mama, her gentle hands, her belief in him, the way she told him his voice mattered even when the world said otherwise. He let that memory steady him. Then he began to sing. The first note was soft, delicate, almost a whisper, but then came the next, and the next. His voice grew warmer, fuller, like a flame remembering how to burn. It filled the tiny booth with emotion, honesty, and something both old and brand new. Something no one had ever quite heard before. Marian froze. Her fingers hovered over the controls. Her eyes widened behind her glasses. She had listened to hundreds of young singers walk in and out of that studio, but none sounded like this, not one. She whispered to herself, "My goodness." When he finished, the last note lingering in the dusty air, Elvis opened his eyes, breathless. The silence that followed made him panic. Had he messed up? Had he embarrassed himself again? Then the recording room door swung open. Marian stood there, stunned. "Don't move," she said quickly. "There's someone you need to meet." Before he could respond, she disappeared down the hallway. Elvis stood frozen, heart racing. Moments later, footsteps approached, low, deliberate. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, stepped into the room. He wasn't a tall man, but he had a presence, a seriousness in his eyes that suggested he understood music in ways most people never would. He studied Elvis quietly, then nodded toward the mic. "You the boy singing in here?" Sam asked. Elvis nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." Sam crossed his arms. "Sing me something else." Elvis blinked. Now. His hands trembled. His throat felt dry, but he stepped back to the mic. This time he sang something raw, something soulful, letting the music carry every bruise, every hope, every tender moment he kept hidden from the world. When he finished, Sam pressed his lips together, deep in thought. After a long moment he asked, "Who told you couldn't sing?" Elvis's cheeks flushed slightly. "A teacher," he murmured. Sam shook his head. "Well, she was wrong." The words washed over Elvis like warm rain, healing, freeing, unbelievable. For the first time in his life, someone other than his mama heard him and said he was good, no special. And in that tiny Memphis studio, under flickering lights and peeling paint, the quiet life of a shy boy shifted ever so slightly towards something extraordinary. The night of Elvis's first real performance felt electric, as if the whole sky were holding its breath. The venue wasn't grand, just a small stage inside an old Memphis theater, but to Elvis it looked like the biggest arena in the world. Rows of wooden seats stretched out in front of him, filled with curious faces, skeptical whispers, and restless shuffling. The lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too hot, too focused. Backstage, Elvis paced with his guitar clutched in one hand, his other hand pressed nervously to his chest. His heart was pounding so loudly he wondered if the audience could hear it through the curtain. He tried to breathe, but every inhale felt tight. Every doubt he'd ever heard returned in a rush. "You'll never be a singer. You sound strange. Nobody's going to like that style." The world outside was loud, but inside him, a little voice whispered something much quieter, much older. "Sing anyway." It was the same voice that comforted him in that classroom years ago, the one his mama nurtured every time she held him on the porch. But right now, even that voice felt faint. A stagehand popped his head backstage. "Elvis, you're up next." Elvis nodded, though his legs wobbled. He stepped toward the opening in the curtain, peeking out. The crowd looked restless, almost impatient. People whispered questions. "Who's this kid? Never heard of him. Looks too nervous to perform." A group of teenagers in the front row snickered, nudging each other as if predicting a disaster. Elvis's stomach twisted. He almost turned back. Then he remembered something, not a sound, not a voice, but a feeling. His mother's hands around his own, steady, warm, full of belief. He squeezed the neck of his guitar and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit him instantly, blinding him for a moment. The chatter died down, not out of excitement, but confusion. Elvis didn't look like the polished performers the audience was used to. He was young, a little shaky, a little unsure, but there was something in his eyes, something gentle, something unspoken, that made the room lean forward just a little. The announcer introduced him with a shrug, as if the name meant nothing. Elvis Presley. A few claps, mostly silence. Elvis swallowed. His palms were sweating so badly he nearly dropped his pick. He strummed a shaky chord to test the mic. It sounded flat, uneven, almost embarrassing. A whisper from the crowd, "This isn't gonna go well." He closed his eyes, and then he remembered why he was here. He wasn't singing for approval. He wasn't singing for applause. He wasn't even singing for the chance at fame. He was singing for the boy inside him, the one who hummed in the back of the classroom, for the mama who held him when he cried. For every moment he doubted himself but showed up anyway. He took a deep breath and then he began to sing. The first note floated into the air, soft but steady. The next came warm, rich, unmistakably different. A hush fell over the crowd, not a forced one, but an involuntary pause, the kind people make when they hear something unexpected. Elvis's voice didn't just echo across the stage. It filled the room. It curled around every seat, every ear, every heart. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was real, raw, alive. People leaned forward. Mouths opened slightly in surprise. A few goosebumps appeared on arms and necks. Then Elvis hit a note, a powerful, soulful rise straight from his chest, and the entire room felt it like a shockwave. A woman in the second row gasped. A man whispered, "Who is this kid?" Someone stood up, unable to stay seated, drawn to the energy bursting off the stage. Elvis felt the shift. The fear inside him melted into fire, warm, fierce, unstoppable. His foot tapped. His hips moved without him thinking about it. His voice surged with confidence he didn't know he had. By the time he finished the final note, the room had erupted. People were cheering, actually cheering. Not politely, not out of obligation, but with genuine awe. Some were smiling wide, others wiping tears. A few stared in stunned disbelief, trying to understand how a shy boy, unsure and trembling just minutes ago, could command a stage like a man born for it. The applause crashed over Elvis like a wave, powerful enough to steal his breath. He stood frozen, overwhelmed, trembling again, this time not from fear, but from joy. He had been seen, heard, understood. And as he stepped off the stage, heart pounding in a brand new way, he knew something deep and certain. The world had just heard his voice, and nothing would ever be the same. The auditorium in Memphis was overflowing that night. Reporters squeezed between excited fans. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. The air buzzed with the electric anticipation of thousands waiting to see the young man whose voice was sweeping across America. Inside the dressing room, Elvis paced slowly, smoothing down the collar of his glittering suit, steadying his breath. He was older now, confident, polished, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet memory tugged at him. A classroom. A laugh, a woman's voice saying he would never be a singer. He hadn't thought of Miss Porter in years, but tonight, she was in the audience. He learned it only an hour earlier, when the event coordinator shyly told him a former teacher had requested a seat. Elvis froze when he heard the name. Miss Porter, the same teacher who once embarrassed him in front of the class and planted the first painful seed of doubt in his heart. But he didn't refuse her. He didn't scold her. He simply asked that she be placed near the front. Now, as the velvet curtains began to rise, Elvis took one final breath, stepped into the radiant spotlight, and let the roar of the crowd wash over him. They were on their feet, clapping, whistling, calling his name. It was a sound that would have once terrified him, but now it filled him with gratitude, a reminder of how far he had come. He began to sing. From the first note, the room fell into a trance. His voice was richer now, layered with years of heartbreak, triumph, and soul. Every word carried weight. Every melody carried memory. Lights swept across the audience, and he saw her, Miss Porter, seated near the front, hands clasped tight, her face pale with disbelief. Her eyes glistened with something between awe and regret. Elvis didn't look away. He sang straight through her, not in anger, but in forgiveness. Halfway through the performance, he paused and adjusted the mic. The room quieted instantly, hanging onto his every breath. "There's someone here tonight," Elvis said softly, his southern drawl warm and steady. "Someone from my childhood. Someone who saw me long before any of you did." The audience murmured with curiosity. "She was my teacher," he continued, "back when I was just a shy kid in the back of the classroom." Miss Porter's shoulders tensed. She looked down at her lap. "She told me I didn't have a voice," he said gently. "Told me I'd never be a singer." A hush spread through the auditorium. People glanced around. Some gasped in disbelief. Miss Porter slowly raised her head, trembling. Elvis smiled, not with bitterness, but with grace. "But you know," he said, tapping his chest lightly, "sometimes people can be wrong, and sometimes their words don't break you, they build you." The crowd erupted in applause, but Elvis lifted his hand lightly to quiet them. "I used to be angry about it," he admitted. "I used to wonder why she said what she did, but now I realize something." He took a step forward, looking right at the woman who once crushed his spirit. "If she hadn't doubted me, I might never have learned how to believe in myself. Her words didn't stop me. They lit a fire inside me." A tear slipped down Miss Porter's cheek. Elvis nodded to her, a gesture of compassion, of release. "And I want to thank her," he said softly, "because every journey has someone who challenges you, someone who makes you choose, give up, or rise." The audience rose to their feet, applauding wildly. Miss Porter pressed her hands to her mouth, sobbing quietly. Elvis stepped away from the mic, walked to the edge of the stage, and extended his hand toward her. For a moment, Miss Porter hesitated, frozen in shock. Then she stood, trembling, and placed her hand in his. He clasped it gently. "Thank you for coming," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." She managed through tears. "It's all right," he said. "I made it." And he had. Not because he was born a legend, not because the world understood him right away, but because he kept singing anyway. As the music swelled behind him and he prepared to sing his final song of the night, Elvis looked out over the crowd, thousands of faces shining with admiration, and he knew the truth. Where he came from didn't hold him back. Who doubted him didn't define him. Who believed in him, his mama, that kind stranger in the studio, and eventually himself, made him unstoppable. And as he lifted the microphone once more, his voice rising like a prayer over the audience, the message was clear. Kindness changes everything. Belief can change a life, and the world is forever changed when one person chooses to rise.